Monday, the 10th of March, 2025, and I wasn't able to get on Twitter for some reason. And so I'm just checking that now to see if I can even log in. Like, I'm all paid up and stuff like that. There's no issues with my credit card, so there shouldn't be an issue. Anyway, not so much. So yeah, this morning's video, very intense, and I do hope that people take the time to watch it, especially from just a guy talking about what has actually been going on in Israel and Palestine and the U.S. and more Western societies now for the last several decades, and how people that are within government now, left or right, and media, is not helping. But before we get into that, actually, I'm not going to get into that anymore. Look at my other video for that. And I posted some more on my social media. BlackRock just bought the Panama Canal for $22.8 billion. That is confirmed. And Justin Trudeau embracing Mark Carney and really excited that he is the one taking over. It's all the same. It's all the same. Even if it was Chrystia Freeland who got like 8% of the vote. By the way, he was not elected. He was selected from the MPs, Liberal, who have also been terrible at their jobs for years. And yeah, I think he got like 89% of the votes from them. And people are trying to say that it's because he was like removed from government for several years. No, he wasn't. For 5 years, he's been hired as like some kind of an financial expert and advisor. And he's been working in and around the government, including because they have direct involvement with the banking systems. And I'm going to get into a video on that actually in the next few minutes and show you just how much control banks have versus government and all that stuff. But anyway, so Justin Trudeau, I think it was the 10th of December. I just want to get the clip up. Just give me a second here. I'll see if I can find it in my history. He was calling out Donald Trump in December for being sexist, misogynist. And it was Fox that reported it. Okay, is it coming? Oh, page not found. That's already starting to drop it. Yeah. It was a setback for women's progress. I just wanted to see if I can get an actual video of it. Found it. All right. So this was this past.
On a steady, if difficult sometimes, march towards progress. And yet, just a few weeks ago, the United States voted for a second time to not elect its first woman president. Everywhere, women's rights and women's progress is under attack, overtly and subtly. But I want you to know that I am, and always will be, a proud feminist. You will always have an ally in me and in my government.
Yeah, he said that. And the hypocrisy. Because Chrystia Freeland, she was on the ticket to be the leader of the Liberal Party. And a woman. And she would have been the first woman, I believe, in Canadian history to ever be a leader of the Liberal Party. So Kim Campbell, she wasn't elected, she was elected, but she was a prime minister for a couple of months, conservative. So conservatives that he's claiming are misogynist and sex, all of this stuff, this was your prime opportunity. Again, she would have been terrible too, but this would have been your great opportunity to show Trump how it's done, right? He's a sexist, right? And like it's a step back for women's progress and all this stuff when he's talking about Trump winning against Hillary and Kamala. And again, both these women were not great. They were not good, not qualified, not remotely. DEI hires, absolutely criminal, completely involved in foundations that fund criminal activities, human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking. My goodness, these people. All right, back on the stories here. But yeah, what a hypocrite. I went on a nice walk with the dogs today. It's such a nice day out, or it was, before the chemtrails came out. And so we were out walking for at least an hour. Exclusive. Chinese narco suspect caught in private meeting with Trudeau, investigated by DEA, linked to Panama, Caribbean, Mexico police sources. So Paul King Jin is his name, and this was in 2015, 2017, and then he started getting investigated. And yeah, just unbelievable. Just like the network of Chinese criminals that Justin Trudeau likes to operate with. Just very interesting. All right, now on to a really good video from Just to Do It Again. I'm gonna take a few days, maybe a week, and look at a lot of his stuff and do my own research on it, just to verify stuff like I've been doing. But his work is so good.
Oh, Canada. Have any of you been watching the news lately and thought to yourself, what the hell is going on? You can't change the channel without hearing about more job losses, swine flu, the recession, war in Afghanistan, and another election already? What could all of this mean? Well, let's start off with money. Where does it even come from?
And I think this was before COVID.
Where do I think it comes from? Like it's made? I don't know, the government?
Money comes from paper.
I believe it comes from trees.
Yeah, exactly.
In the long run, I think it comes from trees. No, I believe money. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not certain.
It's a trick question.
He's a lot of cotton.
Well, it's actually an interesting question. First of all, money is prior to money. This is going to sound like a long answer, but I'm not quite sure I know the nature of your question. But let me see how I can handle it. Thank you. Prior to money, essentially trade.
It's actually simple. Over 95% of our money is created by private banks. That means there's less than 5% of government-created money. Let's look at the differences between creating the money ourselves and borrowing it from private banks. Creating the money ourselves pretty much just costs the labor to print it and the hard work to back it up. While borrowing money from private banks can cost up to 10 times or more than the principal before it's paid. Don't believe me?
I think that the problem isn't necessarily, in my opinion, that we issued that debt through a competitive bond process. The issue is that the level of spending that we engaged in was not appropriate, and we got into a situation where we spent too much.
This is Canada's federal debt. From 1867 to 1992, we owed $423 billion. However, 91% of this debt is the result of interest on interest. And only 8% of the money was actually used on real things, like goods and services. But now we have to pay back over 10 times what we needed, simply because we borrowed from private banks instead of ourselves. So where do these private banks get their billions of dollars from that they lend out? Nowhere! They just write down a number on a piece of paper and lend it out as if it was money to families trying to put a roof over their heads, students trying to get an education, or governments looking to improve the country. Banks then get paid multiple times back with your hard work. Every time they issue a loan, they are creating brand new money. It never existed before you walked into the bank.
So pretty much like you say, I go into a bank, I say, what kind of like $10,000 pay for my college? They say, sure, let me just go run this off the machine, and then you can pay us back with your hard-earned money.
Right. Exactly.
That's pretty crazy.
They just get you to believe that they're lending you what's inside their vaults. But it couldn't be further from the truth.
For instance, banks. Yeah, do banks have the amount of money that they have in reserve? The answer is no.
There's about $50 billion of real cash in Canada. All the private banks combined only have $4 billion in their vaults, or what they call reserves. And yet they've lent out $1.5 trillion, which they then charge interest on.
I think that the amount of money that's held in reserve in Canada, you're right, is pretty low. One of the reasons it's so low is because our banking system is as stable as it is.
Okay. So what would happen if we simply wanted our money back?
We would have a credit crisis, and the system would not be sustainable. So we'd have to reorganize and restructure, which is what happened actually in the Depression. I don't see that happening again.
Yeah.
But theoretically, that's what would happen.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a stable system.
So isn't it a little bit fraudulent though? If I were to walk into a bank and they give me a receipt, I can redeem at any time. But it's only noticed that it would be called fraud if everyone came to the bank and requested their money.
I'm going to answer your question, but then I want to go back to mine
Okay.
because it really is. This is the huge change of the last 5 years. It's not fraudulent. It's not fraudulent because everybody understands it, but it is.
No one really understands.
Well, okay. I mean, those who know about it knew about it, so it's not fraudulent.
I talked to the teachers and MPs, even MPPs, and they had no idea that there was only $4 billion in the vaults, but over $1 trillion is lent out.
Yeah. Let me go back.
He's so nervous.
The fact that they didn't know it, they should have. I mean,
but really, no one does.
Okay.
Should that be involved a little bit more before we start using money?
We're so fucking dumb.
Where it is, where it comes from.
Well, no.
Every one of them.
Okay, so it's one thing to
Even
lend
the
out money you
teachers are so
just
dumb.
don't have. But how can you charge interest on nothing? And not just any kind of interest.
Compounded interest.
Here's a fun way to explain the difference between regular interest and compounded interest. Imagine lending someone $1 at the time Christ was born, at let's say 6% interest. Ready? Jesus Christ is right. This is especially scary when you consider that all credit cards, loans, and mortgages are all to be paid back with compounded interest. By the way, if you translate the word mortgage to its original language, French, it literally means death pledge, because people will often work their whole lives to pay off their home by the time the banks have made all their money. Interestingly enough, the French Canadians use a different word for mortgage called hypothèque, probably because no one in their right mind would sign up for something called a death pledge. Could you imagine? So coming back to our analogy on compounded interest, you can probably see why Jesus threw the bankers out of the temple in the New Testament. And look what ended up happening to him.
Yeah. This was like 16 years ago.
It's interesting how the operation of banks in Canada are all textbook examples of fraud, counterfeit, and theft.
There was no fraud. People should have known. But there really is a problem. And that is that the people who knew didn't stop.
Now, if I did what these private banks do on a daily basis, I would end up here. Here. Or maybe here.
That's funny.
So how come the banks can break the law, but no one else can? Well, it's technically not breaking the law when our elected officials create bogus legislation like what's contained in the Bank Act. It says that banks can lend out as much money as they want without having to have a single dollar.
In 1991, there was legislation passed in the Bank Act that stated that reserve requirements for banks is completely nil. They don't need to have a dollar in their vaults to actually issue out money.
Yeah, I don't know if I could agree with you on that.
Well, maybe you'll agree with the Office of Jim Flaherty when they say there is no statutory reserve for banks in Canada.
And not that they don't have no reserves, because they do, but according to the bank...
You just take this.
Yeah.
John Gray? Yeah, go ahead.
I had read that somewhere in the Bank Act of Canada that it was allowed that somewhere between 1990 and 1991 that reserve requirements for banks would be phased out in the next few months.
I tightened them up.
So they have returned to.
I tightened them up. They were eased up. Conservatives eased them up in 90 or 91.
Yeah.
And I tightened them up in 95.
So what did you make them? What is the? You said between
what they are now. It's roughly 7-1.
Roughly 7-1.
But I want to go back to the main question.
Maybe he means he tightened it up so much that it slipped right through his fingers back into legislation. Because although there are other complex regulations that banks still have to meet, our government has given private companies the authority to break the law, which in turn is bankrupting the people and the government itself. And then when our government decides to so-called fix the mess that they created, they simply make cuts to all the programs that we'd like to spend our tax dollars on, and instead direct it towards an inescapable debt.
Anyway, I decided I'm going to get my $5. So I got to go in the bank, right? Which is, it's hard because they're open for like 10 seconds. Like, and then they close. They're never open. But I go in. I get to a teller and I say, I want my $5. So she looks at me up and says, you don't have $5. And what happens is we charge you another 15 for only having 5. So now you know how much I have? I have -10. -10. That means I don't even have no money. I wish I had nothing, but I don't not have any money. I don't have it. I can't afford something that doesn't cost anything. I can't afford it. If somebody goes, hey, it's free, take it. I can't afford that. That costs nothing. That's more than I need $10 to be broke.
So on a daily basis, how much exactly are we spending on this pointless debt?
I don't even know, like a lot of money, like 100,000, maybe more than that.
We spend $160 million every day.
Are you serious? Oh my god.
Yeah, that's right. According to Statistics Canada, both federal and provincial debt combined, we're paying $160 million each and every day, or $60 billion every year.
And guess where that's at now? Because this was 16 years ago, and we got fucked over the last 5 years especially. It's way worse now.
Let's put all this into perspective. The largest counterfeiters in Canada produced $3.5 million and were sentenced to 5 years in prison. The largest bank robberies in Canada, committed by the Stopwatch Gang, stole about $15 million and got 16 years in prison. As a result of borrowing from private banks, $160 million goes missing every day, and no one even gets fired.
So what you're saying is pretty much the banks that are in Canada that are chartered by like Parliament and all that, by Parliament, are pretty much just robbing the Canadian government and in turn the Canadian citizens because they're causing us to have a higher tax rate than required. You know, just to dig into their pockets and get themselves a little bit richer.
So what could you do with $160 million every day?
God.
Oh my god. What I would do, I would pay off my school, I would pay off my parents' mortgage. Like, holy, I'd go on like 10 trips.
Let's start out with 160 million for a lifetime. Never mind a day, buddy, because I'd be in a forever party.
No idea. 160 million? Like, that's so much money. I would even know what to do with it.
You'd become pretty selfish, I think, right? You'd be self-centered, that's for sure, because you wouldn't have anything to care about.
If you really wanted to, you could buy the Maple Leafs franchise just after a few days and still have millions left over to party with. Probably to try and forget that you bought the Leafs franchise. Or you could buy enough beer to keep the whole country wasted 24/7. I think we'd get a lot of votes for that. I got an idea. How about as an incentive to pay off the debt, we start stacking the payments with $100 bills and create a new national monument? Think about it. The CN Tower stands about a quarter-mile high. If we stacked our debt using $100 bills, we could create the first ever money tower, totaling 540 miles high. That would dwarf the CN Tower, and it may help with our space exploration. Talk about a tourist attraction. But let's not get over our heads. First things first, we have to change this picture. Because federal and provincial debt combined, we still owe about $800 billion. Plus, every time we make those $60 billion payments, a good chunk of that goes to compounded interest alone. In other words, when we make these $60 billion payments, we may only see about $50 billion taken off. And when you think about how we've already spent about $1.5 trillion over the years on a debt that we still have, any new debt our government gets us into turns into that number times much more. I know some of you may be asking, why on earth would the government keep digging themselves a hole of debt to get out of debt? Well, obviously you don't come from Canada. You see, in Canada, when we dig ourselves into a hole, we don't use anything innovative like, let's say, a ladder to get us out. No. We just keep using the same shovel that got us there in the first place. I guess we figure that since the Earth is round, we should get somewhere eventually. So, we just keep digging. Keep digging until we find ourselves in a whole new world. And even if it looks scary, we're told it's the only way. Is there, would you say, a fundamental problem? Is there an underlying problem in the monetary system, or is this the way it should be?
No, I don't think there's an underlying problem in the monetary system. The credit is a good thing.
Okay, well, how's the rest of the world doing then? What? The Earth is $52 trillion in debt? To who? Pluto? Guess again. Okay, so the money system in Canada clearly doesn't benefit the people. Why hasn't anyone told us about this?
And big banking industries are mortgages, real estate, loans, and stuff like that. Companies like BlackRock, JP Morgan, etc., etc.
Once a nation parts with the control of its currency and credit,
It's not just the heads of the banks.
it matters not who makes
They
that
work
nation's
with others.
laws. Usury once in control will wreck any nation. Until the control of the issue of currency and credit is restored to government and recognized as its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talk of the sovereignty of Parliament and of democracy is idle and futile.
Who are you?
Well, I was only the 10th Prime Minister of Canada.
Whoa. Well, you definitely won't hear any of our current politicians say something nearly that profound.
Yes, and now I'm ironically on the $50 bills.
That sucks, man.
Tell me about it.
Well, that's just one Prime Minister of Canada's thoughts on money. No big deal, right?
The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest creative opportunity. The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest, money will cease to be master, and become the servant of humanity.
You too, Lincoln?
For once, someone listened to what I said.
Sorry, I just never read those statements in any school textbooks before.
I made it clear that my greatest accomplishment as being president was that I killed the bank. And yet I too am ironically on the face of everything I was so passionately against.
And then the private banks put your faces on their corrupt money? No offense, guys, but that's incredibly disgraceful.
Especially after being assassinated.
Carney's on money. His signature.
I'll say.
I managed to escape. Right here, buddy. Whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. When you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate.
Hey, Garfield, weren't you president for only like 4 months?
Well, I was killed shortly after making that comment.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Well, anyone else?
I myself prefer my New Zealand eggs for breakfast.
Isn't it kind of sad that we have to dig up what our dead leaders had to say about money, instead of trusting the ones that are alive and in office today? I mean, we've seen how little they know about how the system works.
So do provincial governments ever borrow money from, say, charter banks?
No.
No?
No.
That's just federal?
No. As far as I know, I couldn't tell you offhand.
And it's just, I just don't know why the government doesn't just borrow money from the Bank of Canada, as it states like in the Constitution and in the Bank of Canada Act, that the government has the right to do such things to prevent things like debt from happening.
Well, it's You may know more about it. Obviously, you've researched a little bit more than I have.
I know that they have ratings on their basis, which when they do borrow funds, they get an interest rating. And yeah, yes, they will borrow money from banks.
Now, Canada is like the fly in the ass of an elephant in terms of the overall importance in the world.
Well, I'm not an economist. The Prime Minister is.
Let's be clear about what the situation is. We have not been following the same policies as the United States. The economic and financial mess in the United States is disastrous. The policies have been irresponsible. We've made very different choices in Canada. We have a budget that's in surplus, not a budget that's in deficit. We're paying off debt in Canada, not adding to our debt.
Are your policies working?
Look, I would say that overall we're being successful. We're keeping the economy on course. We're not going into a recession. We have a slowdown, but we are not in the kind of economic crisis we have in the U.S.
And the world is entering an economic period unlike and potentially as dangerous as anything we have faced since 1929.
What happened that me, normally a very steady banker, will lend you the money to buy a home that you don't think?
Well, first of all, is it actually money that they're lending people?
Oh yeah, the money they're lending you.
Is it actual money or is it
real money?
It's not a receipt to present money?
No, it's real money.
Isn't there a difference between bank credit?
Yes, there is, but let's go back to it. Don't change the subject.
I know economists will say, well, we could run a small deficit, but the problem is that once you cross that line, as we see in the United States, nothing stops deficits from getting larger and larger and spiraling out of control.
Okay.
But no, wait a minute. Unless you want to get, you're asking me what was the cause of the current crisis.
Well, no, like I just want to know where money comes from.
Well, let me tell you something. Let me just take it one step further, despite the fact that's not where you want to go.
I don't think we've necessarily lost control of our currency, and there are always restrictions in a global market in terms of how much control you have over your currency.
I want to go back to the real thing, because this is really you'd asked the question at the very beginning, but the financial crisis that we're in.
Oh, well, it was just where does money come from? I'm not, yeah, it is.
No, wait a minute, but it's really important to understand.
We obviously don't agree on everything, but he understands that, I think everybody understands that Canada's a sovereign country. And whether it's dealing with the United States or dealing with China, the fact that a country's a lot bigger doesn't stop us from standing up for our interests and values.
Still need convincing about how ridiculous the monetary system is? It costs 4 cents to make 1 cent, which makes no sense. Or would it make sense to make no sense? Well, this brings me to my next question. Who physically prints our government dollar bills?
The money itself is printed by the Royal Canadian Mint.
The Royal Canadian Mint and the Bank of Canada?
No, the Bank of Canada is responsible for monetary policy. The actual physical production of dollar bills and $5 bills, no longer dollar bills, of bills of denominations and coins by the Royal Canadian Mint.
Okay.
Mainly in Winnipeg.
Okay, new rule. If you control the nation's money, you should probably know who prints it.
I spoke to Finance Minister Jim Flaherty, and I asked him, where does money come from? Like, who physically actually prints the dollars in Canada? And he told me it was the Canadian Mint.
Yeah, the Canadian Mint. The Canadian Mint prints the dollars and does the coins.
But dude, I thought it was the Bank of Canada that contracts the work.
Well, the Bank of Canada is the central bank, but the Mint is responsible for providing the currency.
Then why does it say on the Bank of Canada's website that they are the country's sole banknote issuing authority? Let's try calling the Mint and ask them ourselves.
Do you guys have anything to do with printing the dollar bills in Canada?
There is a dollar bill in Canada.
But does the Canadian Mint have anything to do with printing dollar bills in Canada?
No.
None?
No. That's the Bank of Canada. Do you want me to get your phone?
Oh, you may want to tell that to the finance minister.
Pardon?
I said you may want to tell that to the finance minister.
Okay.
He doesn't know.
Okay. So, sorry, I didn't know about that.
No, it's okay. So just maybe make a memo for him, though.
So it is the Bank of Canada who's responsible for printing our dollars, but they don't do the actual printing themselves. They contract the work to 2 private companies, the Canadian Banknote Company and BA International, which as of 1999 was bought by a privately owned multi-billion-dollar German company called Geisek and Devrient. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, which is scary considering that they're in control of printing our dollars. A few things about this German company, Geisek and Devrient. They're the second largest banknote printing company in the world, And they've been involved with the printing of banknotes for 2 separate countries suffering from periods of hyperinflation. What is hyperinflation? Well, imagine going to the store to buy a loaf of bread on sale for $20 million. That's hyperinflation. So much money is printed that it completely devalues the dollar, and prices rise dramatically because of it.
That's going to be $20 million.
Okay, there's $20 million.
Whoa. What are you, a bank or something?
Here's a coin commemorating Germany's hyperinflationary period in the 1920s, where it's inscribed that a single glass of beer was worth $4 billion. Hyperinflation has destroyed the German dollar so much that people were actually using money as wallpaper. And who is getting paid to print all the ridiculous amounts of money this whole...
I will say one thing. Well, I'll say a couple positive things about Mark Carney. The issues with Mark Carney are, well, there's so many, but he's done some things fairly good. And so I want to say what ChatGPT has to say. Again, it's a very biased social media app or software app, I mean. Okay, let's see what else I was talking about here. Yeah, so Kim Campbell, 1993, she was the first and only female Prime Minister of Canada from June to November 1993. First woman to hold the position but served for only 132 days. As of today, Canada has never had a female Prime Minister from the Liberal Party. So I was looking at the Bank Act of 457. Section 457 of Canada's Bank Act historically required banks to maintain primary reserves, specific assets like coins, notes, and deposits at the Bank of Canada, to ensure liquidity and stability. This mandate was phased out over a 2-year period following the Act's proclamation, which, with incremental reductions every 6 months, ultimately eliminating the reserve requirement. So, wow. And it goes on from there. Yeah, Mark Carney, a distinguished economist and former central banker, has recently assumed the role of Canada's Prime Minister, succeeding Justin Trudeau. Oh my God. And he friggin' made his chief of staff, whatever you want to call it, friggin' Marco Mendicino. Oh my God, what a shit show. I just want to make sure that you can see this. Yeah, you can. Okay, yeah. And so like my point to that was he was the public safety officer during the Freedom Convoy era and lied in Parliament about arson and multiple other staged and planned events. He wanted to employ tanks on innocent civilians and government assets embedded in the crowds. He allegedly knew Brian Fox, who may have been the one holding the racist flag in Ottawa, and a millionaire. He was emailed the medical, scientific, and government data surrounding COVID and lockdowns, and he gaslit literally everyone. Literally everyone. And this is who Mark Carney has. And again, all they do is just shift departments. Like these members of parliament, like there's no experts in any of these departments. They just cycle through these different positions, and I don't know how they get away with it. So people like Melanie Joly and Anita Anand and Marco Mendicino and Bill Blair and friggin' all, it's just, again, it's just so frustrating that nothing ever changes because no one ever leaves. No one ever gets fired. It's just disgusting. Like this guy lied to us so many fucking times, and he was a public safety officer. And instead of looking at information like I was even sharing, I've shared this on email on videos before. I emailed him his official site, called his cabinet, very respectful, and I was emailing medical, scientific, and government data like the VAERS, like the natural immunity versus like the after inoculation. I was talking about adipose fat tissue and oh my God, not aspirating needles and so many other things that it's all coming out now, but still very censored in Canada. Anyways, that's who Mark Carney has. And again, he's the godfather of Chrystia Freeland's son. And so either way, like no one in the Liberal Party is different. Yeah. And so Carney has been a vocal critic of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, questioning their efficacy as stable stores of value and reliable mediums of exchange, because I'll get to it. He has expressed concerns about their volatility and potential deflationary impact on the economy. Conversely, Carney is a proponent of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, which I've talked about before. This is not a good idea. This gives more control of our finances. Oh my God, and especially electronically, especially digitally right now. He advocates for CBDCs as secure and efficient tools that can enhance financial inclusion and allow central banks to maintain control over monetary policy. Like that, literally, he's literally saying it. He believes that CBDCs could provide a safer alternative to private cryptocurrencies, potentially preventing financial crimes while enhancing monetary sovereignty. Just the irony in that. Monetary sovereignty. Oh my God. And of course, he uses that term. Bank of England, Bank of Canada. Carney's ascent to premiership has significant implication for Canada's financial and technological sectors. His skepticism towards decentralized cryptocurrencies, coupled with support for CBDCs, suggests a potential shift in Canada's approach to digital finance. This policy direction may influence the development and regulation of financial technologies within the country. And he's even said that he would declare an emergency act. He would declare emergency measures even for financial reasons, economic reasons. Moreover, Carney's broader economic vision includes positioning Canada as a leader in emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence and digital innovation. So all this bio-digital convergence AI stuff that I said that Canada is very heavily involved in, and with WEF especially, also like very prominent Canadians as part of WEF doing this, right? They're all in the same fucking circle as Mark Carney, and it's going to be complete international control, and people like him are going to be the ones profiting the most. I'm sure there's some kind of kickbacks and shares and stocks and all this other stuff, and money put into this, and yeah. In summary, Prime Minister Mark Carney's expertise in economics and central banking is expected to shape Canada's monetary policy, particularly concerning digital currencies and technological advancements. His administration's approach will likely focus on leveraging technology to drive economic growth while assuming financial stability and security. And so, is there anything else I want to? No, so that's it for now. Back to the movie. It's 16 years old. Oh, and friggin' Ezra Levant was on Viva Fry today, and I like Viva Fry, so like whatever. But Ezra, he is such a friggin' propagandist, and he should take a look at the friggin' video that I shared this morning.
This whole time?
Anyway.
Or more recently, they were printing money for the country of Zimbabwe and their hyperinflated economy. At one point in the 1980s, the Zimbabwean dollar was actually worth more than the US dollar. But since the dictator of Zimbabwe ran his country into the ground and commanded the printing of trillions and trillions and now quadrillions of dollars backed by nothing, the conversion now is 12 billion to 1. In this photo, a few eggs are on sale for $100 billion. This guy right here is going to buy a burger and fries. So if you feel safe having millions or even billions of dollars in the bank, just remember that at a flick of a switch, the private banks can water your money down until it's worth virtually nothing. All it takes for them to do is keep printing money, and everyone is poor. As for Gaisek and Devrient, countries all around the world seemed outraged over the printing of all this money for Zimbabwe. In June 2008, U.S. officials announced they would not take any action against the firm that is providing key support to Zimbabwe's brutal regime and is also an important contractor to the American government. Yes, even the U.S. government is admitting how morally inappropriate it is to support Zimbabwe's brutal regime by printing these dollars. But they won't do anything to stop it that might compromise their own business with Gaisek and Devrient. But hey, it's business, and in business there are no morals. You should all know that by now. But on July 1st, 2008, after only a few years since Zimbabwe's hyperinflation started to snowball, Gaisek and Devrient finally decided they would no longer print banknotes for Zimbabwe, after their own government of Germany officially told them to stop.
The reason for the sale to the German company arose out of the fact that the need counterfeiting, especially of higher notes, is a problem. And it was going to be very expensive for the Canadian company to, in fact, have the machinery that would produce whatever the heck it is that goes into the bills that prevents counterfeiting. And that's the reason why, in fact, the German company came in.
The point is that Canada should never have let something as important as one of its banknote printing companies to have been bought by foreign companies who support racist dictators. And the excuse to save money is ridiculous when you recall the $160 million every day the government allows to go down the drain.
I'm just wondering if there should be like an institution that the Bank of Canada owns that's job is to print money. And...
Well, that would be that would make more sense. Yeah.
Let's try to recap everything we've learned so far. The Canadian government creates the phony laws necessary to give banks the power to create and manage money for the hardworking people of Canada, apparently for our benefit. However, the money that's created by these private banks is made and backed by nothing, and attached with compounded interest. It's then lent to teachers, students, workers, and families who now have to pay back the banks what was made from nothing many times over with hard work. This creates a debt-based economy, since the majority of money that now circulates was created from a mortgage or some other kind of expensive loan. When an employer pays an employee, it's not actually money, but someone else's debt. In other words, we're trading debt, not money.
Okay, so you wouldn't be for creating a debt-free money system?
No.
Would a debt-free money system be good for the country or no?
No, it would. It would.
I think we'd be better off without a public debt.
What's wrong with everyone? Have they all lost their minds?
In that sense, is a debt-free or debt-based money system, is that healthy for Canada, do you think?
Healthy in the short term, because the alternative is that if you try to balance the books today, you will in fact tip the scales very much in favor of a depression and deflation.
Thank you. Well, luckily for Canadians, we have a way to fix these problems very easily.
The reality is the Bank of Canada has, by legislation, the ability to make whatever money is needed to loan money to the Government of Canada.
And 16
without
years later,
interest.
she's still annoying and still in government.
The Bank of Canada, as it's stated on its official website, is ultimately owned by the people of Canada and has the power under the Canadian Constitution and the Bank of Canada Act to lend money to the government at no interest. And if there is interest to be charged, it would just come back to the people anyway, since we own the bank.
I must admit, I'd rather pay interest to myself than, in
Exactly.
which case I'd probably cut myself a good deal,
Yeah, we never should have privatized our debt and turned it over to the private banks. We should have kept it in the hands of Bank of Canada, at least a major part of it, because then we would have been paying interest back to ourselves.
John, you can borrow from your savings account and I won't charge any interest. Good.
And unfortunately, the Liberal government and the Conservative governments both are too close to the banks. The banks wanted the business, and they managed to convince the government to privatize that debt. And of course, now they're the ones getting the benefits. That's why you notice that they're still very profitable, even though everyone else is suffering.
Here's a rough example about how money in Canada should work. The Canadian government realizes it needs money to help make the country work. So it creates the Bank of Canada, whose sole task is to create and manage money for the people. The government then creates what's called a treasury bond, which is simply an IOU, a piece of paper promising to repay the amount of money that it borrows. This IOU is then given to the Bank of Canada, who then creates the money the same way private banks do, out of nothing. But since it's owned and operated by the people of the country, there's no reason to charge any interest. The government can now distribute the money, which creates jobs. The people can now pool some of their money together and pay off the debt owed to the Bank of Canada, the People's Bank. After the first payment or so, since the Bank of Canada will have to pay its workers and fulfill its job to regulate money, our tax dollars will inevitably circle back into the country, so no new money is required to pay off the debt. And since there is no compounding interest, the debt will never grow, and we'll be able to pay it off very quickly. And once it's paid off, we'll be able to spend our extra hard work, time, and money on other things to help better the country.
I don't need to hear the lecture. I know all of this stuff.
Okay, well.
Sorry, don't mean to be rude, but I don't, just ask me your question.
Okay, well.
And I'm not that knowledgeable on monetary policy. And Green Party policies have not moved have not yet adopted the monetary policy that some of our members would like, which is one which would say we should get rid of the loans that we owe commercial banks and transfer that to the Bank of Canada and pay it off with a Bank of Canada loan and then cancel the debt.
Well, they both seem to know a lot about the monetary system to me. And yet last October in 2008, when the central topic in the federal election was about the economy,
We made a decision to give priority to an issue dominating the news and people's concerns these days, the economy. So there will be an expanded debate on that.
Not one single mention was made from any one of the parties about the monetary system, even from the ones who clearly knew about it. But if we go back to the 2006 federal debate, no one would shut up about the $100 million missing from the sponsorship scandal Paul Martin was involved with. But when $160 million goes missing every day, it's no big deal. Look, this is a mutual problem that every party should agree on fixing, and yet in the most important broadcasted debates prior to our elections, it's not even mentioned once. So coming back to the Bank of Canada, is there really any logical reason why we don't use it?
What would make the government want to borrow money from private banks instead of the Bank of Canada?
It should deal with the Bank of Canada, period.
That's coming from a former finance minister and later prime minister. Let's compare that to Paul Martin, who shares the exact same titles.
Does the Prime Minister or President of either Canada or America have the ability to create debt-free money?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, okay. Because I was reading a quote by...
You've got to ask the question, why don't they?
Why don't they? Right. Why don't they?
Because it's inflationary. Because it drives inflation through the roof.
How's that?
Well, here are my glasses. The only pair of glasses in the world. Okay, and I'm going to sell them for $1, right? And you have $1, and you don't have any money at all, or no, you have $10, and you don't have any money at all. These glasses are on sale for $1. Okay, so you both come to see me, and you want to buy the glasses. I say, okay, fine. How much will you pay me? And you say, I can't pay any. I don't have any money. So I turn to you, and you say, well, fine. I'm the only buyer. I'll pay you $1, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's say the glasses are on sale for $1 today, and you both have $10, right? So you come to me and you say, and you both desperately want my glasses. So you say to me, I'll give you $1. And I say, well, okay, they were for sale for $1, but what will you give me? What are you going to say to me? You're going to say $2. $2. Sure. Okay. All of a sudden, these glasses, which were worth $1, are now worth $2. That's inflation. And that's inflation. The more money there is in supply, the danger there's going to be inflation. That's why everybody says what's happening now as a result of what's going on in the United States is that 5 years from now, we're going to have massive inflation.
So it is the amount of money in circulation that causes inflation, not who distributes the money, right?
It's largely the amount of money in circulation. There are a lot of reasons, but that drives up the...
So when people are saying like, oh, like Mark Carney, like everything was so great when he was like at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, it takes several years for financial policies and stuff like that to like actually, and the printing of the money with Chrystia Freeland, oh my God, during COVID especially, oh my God, just screwed us.
The price, that's right.
And he was a financial advisor.
There's prices because more people can afford to buy something.
Okay, I'm going to replay the last few seconds of that. Remember, he began saying that it was borrowing money from the Bank of Canada that would cause inflation.
The more money there is in supply, the danger there's going to be inflation. That's why everybody says what's happening now as a result of what's going on in the United States is that 5 years from now, we're going to have massive inflation.
So it is the amount of money in circulation that causes inflation, not who distributes the money, right?
It's largely the amount of money in circulation. There are a lot of reasons, but that drives up the price. That drives up prices because more people can afford to buy something.
I think what he's trying to say is now that he's allowed the private banks to make up this magical money that keeps growing in their favor, the government shouldn't borrow money from the Bank of Canada since they would have to create new numbers that don't already exist. But if the Bank of Canada had just been doing its job from the start, it wouldn't make a difference anyway. Do you see how absurd it is to say that the Bank of Canada causes inflation? Besides, since 95% of money is created by private banks, they're the cause of 95% of inflation. Because of the decisions made by prime ministers like Paul Martin, this is how money in Canada sadly works. When the Bank of Canada receives the Treasury Bond, or IOU, from the government, they forfeit their duties to create and manage money themselves and instead hand it over to the private banks. The private banks can now lend their debt-based checkbook money to the government. Compounded interest inevitably takes its toll. And this leads to unfair taxes on the people of the country who have done nothing wrong. And when we need real physical cash to trade smaller amounts of money, the Bank of Canada contracts the work to foreign companies who also print money for dictators, and Canadian Tire. And people wonder why we're in a major economic crisis. Look at the system.
The good news for Canadians is we're slow to get into the slowdown, and we will likely be quick to get out of it because our country basically is solid.
We have a highly regulated industry that has been remarkably successful and has an enormous amount of stability and has a lot of federal controls in.
Mark Carney was, and even ChatGPT confirms it. ChatGPT even confirms it. He acted as an informal advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, providing guidance on the government's economic response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then September 2024, he was appointed as a special advisor and chair of the Liberal Party's task force on economic growth, focusing on strategies to enhance Canada's economic performance. And we got the biggest deficit announced in December under him. So again, like they're not showing the actual facts and concerns that people should have with him and the connections that he has, including Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know how much of a relationship there is there, but there were photos.
We met with the chief economist from the Royal Bank.
And allegedly from his wife's time in school or something like that, knew her, or her sister. Anyway.
Who said that the States is trying
to
move towards a Canadian banking system to give it more stability.
Is the whole world on stupid pills? This much debt is nothing to be proud of. And now countries around the world, including the United States, want to emulate the Canadian banking system? They're in for a shock. Because the government's in debt, students are in debt, farmers, teachers, parents, artists, everyone. And a wise man once said, poverty is the mother of crime.
Well, I guess I would look at it a little bit differently, because the banks are publicly traded companies, and many of these banks, when you look at pension funds, RSPs, RESPs, things along those lines, the banks make money and then they pay it out to shareholders. It doesn't just disappear.
Well, $24 billion just disappeared from the Canadian pension plan, but that didn't stop David Denison, president and CEO of CPP, and his executives from pocketing millions of dollars in bonuses. Or how about the $40 billion that just disappeared from the Quebec pension company?
People like to say, oh, the bad banks, they're making too much money. But it actually, in the big scheme of things, it's a good thing that companies make money. That's how the whole system is based. That's how people's retirements, their investments, that's how it works.
So when our banks are doing bad, our pensions are at risk. And when our banks are doing good, our pensions are still at risk. Gotcha. Why don't we just fix the monetary system? I'm sure all the time, work, and trillions of dollars Canadians would save would more than compensate for the banks not screwing everyone over, just to maybe get a pension. And in return, the quality of life for Canadians would improve tremendously. We would have more time to spend with our families, more time for our hobbies.
That would be nice. You should watch Shoresy. It is hilarious. It's the guy from Letterkenny. Just going to share. In December 2024, Canada's federal government announced a deficit of $61.9 billion for the fiscal year 2023-2024, surpassing the initially projected deficit of Canadian $40.1 billion. Key points: increased spending. The higher deficit was attributed to the pandemic-related expenditures and other unforeseen costs. That was under the direction of Mark Carney. We've already shared that. Right here. Debt to GDP ratio. Despite the larger deficit, the government maintained its debt to GDP ratio target, achieving 42.1 for 20. Again, this is terrible. See, again, they're trying to cover up for this bullshit. Yeah, political implications. The announcement coincided with the resignation of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who had advocated for fiscal restraint. Financial Minister. She was the Deputy Prime Minister, and also the Shadow Finance Minister, but working under the direction of people like Mark Carney, the godfather of her son. So if anyone thinks that he had nothing to do with the economic collapse that we're dealing with now, and the increase in everything, then I don't know what to tell you. And the biodigital convergence AI stuff, massive surveillance, like complete control over our finances. It's all digital.
And all the other things we love in life. And if you're a workaholic, you'll be glad to know that you'd be receiving more rewards for your labor, since we won't be slaving over usury debts anymore.
From what you're saying is that we could have the country that is the most highly advanced country in the world, because we wouldn't have it then if we took these issues into consideration and tried to make some changes.
That's right. And if your concerns are for the environment or underprivileged countries, imagine the differences you'd be able to make with billions of more tax dollars a year going to that cause. But the reality is we're a sinking ship. So how on earth can we save others if we can't save ourselves?
You know, if I were running this country, you could pretty much say to the banks, "Well, we're not paying you back. Like, if you don't like it, get out of the country."
Yeah. So where am I going with all of this? Well, if we take a look at the preamble from the Bank of Canada Act, it states that the bank exists to regulate credit and currency in the best interests of the economic life of the nation. But since we own the bank, and it obviously isn't operating in the best interests of the nation or its owners, there's clearly a conflict of interest, and this needs to be looked at very seriously. Because every country uses the same sort of banking system, and this system is bankrupting all the countries that use it, the governments of the world are surrendering themselves to the international banking institutions. The World Bank, IMF, and BIS. These institutions have a history for supporting dozens of military dictatorships with billions of dollars in loans, and also wreak havoc on developed and underdeveloped countries, including our own.
So, for instance, why do we have a healthcare crisis now? We have a healthcare crisis in 2009 because in 1994, the International Monetary Fund wrote a report to the government of Canada that said, and at that point we were in debt. Remember, this was right before Paul Martin's slaying of the deficit.
So yeah, it would have been like 600, 500 billion.
It was, and the IMF's report was, okay, Canada's not, we're not saying you're a basket case, but our view of your financial viability, and that of course translates into how the bond raters in New York take our financial viability. We would think, we think you'd do better if you did the following things: stop student bursaries and convert them to interest-bearing student loans. Cut the CBC, cut the NFB, cut Via Rail, reduce the number of hospital beds you've got. Now, all of those things happened. There was never any democratic debate about it. We lost 20% of our hospital beds in Canada in the year and a half after the IMF report to the government of Canada. But nobody even really knows it happened. The World Health Organization knows it happened because they've actually done reports on Canada as one of the only modern democracies to have deliberately slashed its healthcare provision in order to slay a deficit. And it's proven, the World Health Organization studies prove that in doing that, we actually made our healthcare situation, not only is the healthcare worse, but the costs of healthcare went up because people couldn't access timely healthcare when they needed it before it became a disaster. So
worse now.
Who actually made those?
You're
cuts?
still in
Paul
government.
Martin. We were told by the IMF that certain things should be slashed. Now, why couldn't a government say to the IMF, go fly a kite? Well, simple reason. Once you have indebtedness to a foreign country or foreign banks, and your credit rating really matters. If you drop from a AAA credit rating to a AA credit rating, as you guys know, your interest rates are going to go up on the debt you have. So you'll be spending more and more and more out of the federal treasury or in the provincial treasury. And that's why Bob Rae, by the way, as Premier of Ontario, didn't keep his campaign promises. Didn't keep them because he got to Ontario and discovered that if he did the things he promised, bond raters in New York, anonymous people, nothing to do with Canadian democracy, would make a decision to drop Ontario's credit rating such that any promises Rae was trying to keep would come from a smaller and smaller amount of an available budget, because more of his budget would have to go to paying interest on the debt. So they have you over a barrel. So once you have a debt, particularly to external sources, now why, if you have a debt to the Bank of Canada, it doesn't matter. If you have a debt that's external, but the rest of the world is looking at how large is your deficit, how large is your debt, how much trouble are you in? I mean, look at the United States right now. It's the biggest debtor country in the world. China holds most of the paper.
Despite of all of this, Jim Flaherty, like his predecessors, is bowing down to the World Bank institutions, which will continue to surrender our currency to international bankers, people who none of us have ever voted for. And as we've learned from our own Prime Minister Mackenzie King,
once a nation parts with the control of its currency and credit, it matters not who makes that nation's laws.
Pope Benedict XVI is calling for a new world financial order. In the third encyclical of his pontificate, Benedict denounced the profit-at-all-cost mentality of the globalized economy, and he lamented that greed brought about the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. The document, entitled Charity and Truth, was released just hours before the G8 summit gets underway in Italy.
And at the G8 summit, the president of Russia presented what he called a united future world currency. He told reporters, here it is, you can see it, you can touch it.
The Pontiff stressed that he is not opposed to a globalized economy, saying that if done correctly, it has unprecedented potential to redistribute wealth around the world.
I don't know how many economics classes the Pope has attended, but I can assure you, these are the kinds of crucial steps necessary to establish a one-world government, which last time I checked, conflicts with Canada being an independent sovereign country. In closing, we must regain control of our country's currency from the private banks, both domestic and international. If our governments can make the laws that give away our currency, then they can make the laws that take it back. And while we're at it, maybe the Bank of Canada's logo should finally be changed to a Canadian maple leaf. After all, a good mother knows when to let her child leave the nest. Sorry, Britain. And if we truly love our country and our children, we'll do something now to save them from a life of debt slavery. I mean, you wouldn't want to borrow money from the mafia and leave the debt to your kids to deal with. We always hear about transparency in government, but we never really see it. And if we did, it would probably scare the living hell out of us. How many of you can identify this man? His name is Paul Desmarais, but you can call him the Canadian Monopoly guy. His family owns and operates Power Corp, one of the largest corporations in Canada. Power Corp owns a dozen companies ranging from financial institutions to new...
Back on Mark Carney because I talked about WEF, but I want to share what ChatGPT will show you. Mark Carney has been actively involved in the World Economic Forum, WEF, in various capacities. He's a foundation board member. Carney serves on the WEF's foundation board, contributing to its mission of engaging political, business, and other leaders to shape global agendas. Like, terrifying. Advocate for the Great Reset Initiative. In April 2020, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Carney discussed the need for a great reset of capitalism, emphasizing the importance of aligning markets with societal values and addressing global challenges like climate change, the climate change stuff as well, the woke DEI stuff. That's all him. CBDCs, all him. His involvement with WEF reflects his commitment to addressing global, this is so nauseating how they have to finish with like, but he's so amazing, no concerns. Come on. Even Pierre Poilievre, like one of his green flags, he's calling out WEF, and so is Trump and Elon Musk, and stopping or at least reducing the money sent to them. Canada, like our friggin' government is balls deep in WEF. Sorry for that, but I mean, it's just true.
Newspapers and media, oil and energies, and more that produce revenues of $24 billion a year and several $100 billion in assets. But his most powerful investments by far are not in world resources, but politicians. Well, what do you think a man's intentions are when he owns a monopolizing corporation called Power Corp? Just some of his employees consisted of 3 of Canada's longest-running prime ministers in recent years, Pierre Trudeau, Brian Mulroney, and Jean Chrétien. As a matter of fact, Paul Desmarais' son, André Desmarais, now co-owner of Power Corp along with his brother, is actually married to Jean Chrétien's daughter, France. So you can only imagine how close these two powerful families are with many years of history. Other employees for Paul Desmarais are former premiers of Ontario and Quebec, William Davis, John Roberts, and Daniel Johnson. Or how about John Ray, brother of Liberal NDP Bob Ray? John is currently Executive Vice President for Power Corp and was longtime advisor to Jean Chrétien, as well as his campaign chairman. There's also former president of Power Corp, Maurice Strong. After becoming a successful businessman with Power Corp and Paul Desmarais, he was able to bridge himself from business to politics with his new circle of friends. He became first executive director of the UN Environment Program and president of the World Federation of UN Associations. Remember, this is a businessman. Some of Maurice's friends include the likes of the World Bank president, James Wolfensohn, former vice president of the US, Al Gore, and former Swedish prime minister and member of the Global Governance Institution, Ingvar Carlsson. And last, but certainly not least, Paul Martin. Paul became president and CEO of one of Power Corp's subsidiary companies, the Canadian Steamship Line, which was eventually sold to him in the 1980s. During his ownership of the Canadian Steamship Line, Martin changed the flags on the ships in order to operate shell companies in overseas countries like Singapore and the Bahamas, where he could exploit the laws to profit from cheap labor, lower environmental standards, and paying virtually no income tax on revenues of several $100 million. After giving the steamship company to his kids, in 2003 he was fit to become Prime Minister of Canada and tell everyone else to pay income tax. And in January 2004, the Canadian federal government revealed that Martin's Steamship Line Company had received over $100 million in federal government contracts, grants, and loans since Martin became finance minister in 1993. This was the same time he was cutting. You can bet with gifts like these, Martin would have to remain pretty loyal to the man who established his family fortune and political success, Mr. Monopoly Man. I mean, Paul Desmarais. And how many of you even knew his name? Some of Paul Desmarais' other friends include the Bush family, the Clinton family, and the president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy. When you consider the circle of friends surrounding Paul Desmarais, it's not hard to imagine how government corruption can set in. But it's our government officials who should never be this infatuated with making money and powerful corporate allies. And yet, sadly, we see exactly that. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when you consider these next things. Bilderbergers. Not Bilderberger, but members of the Bilderberg Group.
Mark
The
Carney.
Bilderberg groups consist of some of the largest visible corporate, political, and royalty members of the world. They hold their meetings annually, usually in remote places where there's no media allowed, at least to broadcast what goes on, because there's plenty of members of the media attending the meetings, such as chairman of the board of the Washington Post, major media outlet owner Rupert Murdoch, and news anchor Peter Jennings. Some of the other members include presidents of the United States, such as Bill Clinton and Gerald Ford. Bankers attend, of course, World Bank President Wolfensohn, Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Timothy Geithner, president.
And Mark Carney. Again, back to good old ChatGPT, just because it's fast right now. Mark Carney, a prominent Canadian economist, not prominent, anyway, and former central banker, has participated in several Bilderberg conferences, including those held in 2023 and 2024. The Bilderberg Group is an annual private gathering of influential figures from various sectors, including politics, business, academia, and media, aimed at fostering informal discussions on global issues. Participation in these conferences is by invitation only, and attendees engage in off-the-record conversations to promote open dialogue and exchange of ideas. Yeah, it's just... Do you want to see what they say? At least 2023 and 2024 they're admitting to. They said several, so. There we go. Mark Carney has participated in at least 6 Bilderberg conferences over the years: 2011, St. Moritz, Switzerland, 2012, Chantilly, Virginia, USA, 2022, location undisclosed. There may have been additional attendances not publicly documented. Yeah, I would say so. I would say between these periods. Wild. Yeah, but he's our new fudging prime minister right now.
Of the Federal Reserve, and somehow became U.S. Secretary of Treasury. He looks confused about it too. That would be like the president of RBC becoming our finance minister. It just reeks of corruption. Dozens of corporate giants sit in as well, such as the CEO and chairman of Google, the CEO of IBM, and the chairman of Nokia and Shell. And who could forget the hard-working royal families? Prince Charles of England and Queen Sophia of Spain. Both go to Bilderberg. And wouldn't you know it, Pierre Trudeau, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper have also all attended.
What is your opinion on these secretive meetings that I hear about of the Bilderberg group that comes time to time in Canada, and they get together, I think, once a year, random places, kind of in the world?
Well, I don't like that, and I don't like the Canadian Conference of Canadian Executives, Tom DeQuino, being part of it. I mean, they meet in Banff and behind closed doors to sell out Canadian sovereignty by saying, Canadian businesses for sale.
Yes,
I don't know why these people, why they're meeting in the first place.
Canadian
They can't tell me they can't. Nobody can tell us why. Maybe they're talking about wallpapering the walls. Who knows, right?
Well, they're so secret that they, I don't like to say in general, I don't think any good comes of meetings that are secret. Democracy really thrives in sunshine, and things that are anti-democratic do best under rocks, right? So if you keep things out of the public eye and they're not accountable, that's concerning. Obviously, if you're negotiating a peace agreement, the doors are shut till you come out. I mean, that's a good thing. But generally, people know what's going on. These meetings are so secretive that nobody knows what's going on. And similarly, the Security and Prosperity Partnership meetings, where the only people allowed in the room are governments and business leaders. That's anti-democratic. I don't like things that are anti-democratic.
Bilderberg meetings, have you heard of this?
I've heard about them. I don't know what that is. I mean, I've secret society type meetings, and they discuss. I recall one being at a place where I went with a friend in Ottawa. I'm trying to think of the place now. It was a hotel outside of Ottawa. in
Right.
Canada.
Was that just 2 years
Brook-
ago?
Brook-
Yeah, it was actually, I was up there
Slider,
because one of my good friends was getting married.
Brook Street.
We went to a Neil Young concert
Oh,
that
cool.
night, and the next day was
Yeah.
all these people were moving in, security and everything.
Yeah.
So it's the Bilderberg conference. So
Again, like our previous current prime ministers have attended these meetings, don't really talk about it. Do you think there would be something to be worried about though?
No, not necessarily. I mean, if to put the scenario forward, if you're talking about if the 100 top people in the world invited me to a meeting, do you think I'd turn it down? Probably not.
I've never been invited, so naturally I'm suspicious.
it's an interesting group. But I can't firm the time on CFRB at give me a time, 10 o'clock at night. I don't know, but I'd certainly like to learn more about it. But it is apparently behind closed doors.
I'm suspicious of those meetings.
Were you ever invited or?
No, they know my views about it.
In 1996, Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, among other Canadians, attended the Bilderberg meeting held in Toronto, King City.
Chrystia Freeland confirmed there could have been more times, but in 2022, 2023, and 2023, she went to Bilderberg meetings.
The building picked was naturally a $66 million resort, which was then owned by CIBC Bank.
And I have a photo.
Some of the other members that attended that year were Ted Rogers, Chairman, President, and CEO of Bell Canada, Chairman of Ford Motor Company, everyone's favorite Conservative Premier of Ontario, Mike Harris, Conrad Black, owner of many newspapers, and just recently sentenced to 78 months in a U.S. federal prison for wire fraud and obstruction of justice, Chairman of CIBC Bank, President of the National Bank of Hungary, David Rockefeller, Chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, and many, many more. But for those of you who don't know the Rockefeller family, they have a bit of a nasty history of playing Monopoly in America, as well as being a major supporter in the creation of a one world government.
Yeah, it was.
But don't take my word for it. Listen to David Rockefeller himself. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. I wish I was making this stuff up, but if you open up page 405 in Rockefeller's own autobiography, he states that, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. I bring this up because this man attends the same secret meetings all of our leading government officials do.
Well, those are the three issues that I'm working on. You may have others. Let's hear from them. You may not agree with me. Let's hear that. That's a lot more fun. And let's just talk about what we're Thank you very, very much.
Canada.
This was about, I believe in 1996, you attended a meeting called the Bilderberg meeting, and as I think you were Minister of Finance at the time. Not many people know about the Bilderberg meeting. I try to speak to people about it, and they think I'm crazy or that it doesn't exist or anything like that. Namely because it's not really widespread in media, and in fact, a lot of media representatives actually attend the meetings themselves, and they just choose not to disclose the information, the context of it. I'm just wondering, in 1996, when you attended, like, just details, like, I mean, if you could explain, like, who invited you, why did you go, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I can't remember who invited me, but I remember going once. The Bilderberg meeting is a meeting of very influential people around the world. Canada, at that point, was considered a third world basket case. We were in trouble under our eyeballs, and I had to go, I essentially went to Common Markets, went to them and say, look, we're getting our act together. And
okay, well, one of the members of the Bilderberg meeting actually, sorry. But just one thing about that Bilderberg meeting is that one of the attendees named David Rockefeller. And I heard you talking earlier about the worst of the Great Depression in 1929, and not many of us have actually lived in those times, so we don't know what we're actually facing. But it could be pretty. Bad. And one of the members of All We Need Is the Right, and this is someone who attended the same meetings as you, and no one really knows about it. In fact, actually, most of the last 5 prime ministers we've had attending these meetings too, Stephen Harper, John Chin, and so on and so on. And I asked him of businessmen who get together behind closed doors and sell out Canadian sovereignty. He said he didn't like them at all, and he was very skeptical.
Well, I may well be at the meeting that I went to. I can't remember if David Rockefeller was there. There was no question of Canadian sovereignty. But what there was a group of people. This was the year that the Wall Street Journal called Canada essentially a banana republic. Said that we were a third world country, we were going down. And I've got to tell you that my first couple of years as finance minister, I did nothing but go around the world basically saying, but Canada was going to turn it around. We did. We did. Within 4 years, we had the best balance sheet of any country in the world.
So what's your opinion?
It's really good. It was really good stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the system. Did he come over? And
Yeah, he told me to because I don't know what it was. He just said that I could ask him the questions. Yeah, again, that's what his chief of staff told me.
Yeah.
And just to carry on with Bilderberg, because ChatGPT and the information, again, like you have to really fight to get this information. Because 2006 Bilderberg meeting took place from June 8th to 11th at the Brook Street Hotel in Ottawa, Canada. This annual conference gathers influential figures from politics, business, academia, and media for off-the-record discussions on global issues. While the complete participant list is not fully officially published, several notable attendees have been identified. Frank McKenna, former premier of New Brunswick and the deputy chair of TD Bank Financial Group. I think just in Toronto, some kind of an excavator tried to rob one. Anyway, Anascotia. Gordon Nixon, president and CEO of the Royal Bank of Canada. Heather Reisman, CEO of Indigo Books and Music. Bernard Lord, premier of New Brunswick. Mark Carney, senior associate deputy minister of finance at the time, late governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. Senior associate deputy minister of finance. Interesting. Etienne Davignon, Belgian businessman and former European commissioner serving as the chairman of the Bilderberg Group during that period. David Rockefeller, American banker and philanthropist, former chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank. Mario Monti, Italian economist and later prime minister of Italy. See a trend? Neelie Kroes, Dutch politician and European commissioner for competition at the time. Richard Pearl, American political advisor and former assistant secretary of defense. Anyway, on with this really informative video.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of an attack on him, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so he said, if he's going to ask him more questions, that he would just have his smart leave.
Okay, if you're an RCMP officer, could you care to explain why Canadian tax dollars are going to protect this guy instead of putting him behind bars? He's conspiring with international bankers in secret who openly talk about world domination via major world crises, on top of participating in the largest theft ever committed in our country's history.
Yeah, you can blame Carney for a lot of the friggin' what we had to endure during the entirety of COVID.
And when confronted about all of this, he acts like a child and has his chief of staff remove my microphone. Is this any way for a Prime Minister of Canada to act? Surely this is newsworthy. Good thing CTV was there to catch the footage.
University of Waterloo, an unusual send-off. While most students kick off Reading Week with a party, a large crowd gathered to get a chance to talk with former Prime Minister Paul Martin. CTV's Nicole Lampa is here with this story. Nicole, what did they discuss?
Kyle, given that Martin was a former finance minister, the economy was the key discussion.
Every country is focusing on what can they do in order to stimulate their national economies.
A worldwide problem is being felt by these students.
What can we as the West?
Matthew Castle asks a former prime minister and finance minister how to survive the economic downturn, not just as a student, but also as a future leader.
As a young person, I'm going to be inheriting this economy. I'm going to be inheriting the budget deficit that Stephen Harper is now racking up. And I think it's important for me to be informed so that I can make good choices and make good decisions.
When you have someone that has done it in the past and affected change, be it whether you agreed with the way he did it or not, it really inspires you to do something.
Others feel the same way.
It's just interesting to hear someone of his caliber speak on these kinds of issues.
You can tell us a lot about
about what's going on. He has a ton of perspective. He was a fantastic politician.
In my experience, is that you can't judge these crises, and they are normally worse, which is why you've got to keep as a country, keep your balance sheet in surplus, and you got to make sure you have the room to maneuver.
The economy wasn't the only topic. Martin also talked about Canada's treatment of Aboriginals, our role in Africa and Afghanistan. For Matthew, these are issues he doesn't mind tackling.
I think when times are tough, that's when you're.
All right, because ChatGPT was really kind of frustrating me, I went and decided to look for myself off of ChatGPT, which usually ends up better anyway. I think this might be it. I'm going to watch it with you. It's not letting me share it. Weird. My laptop's freezing again. All right, calm down, laptop. Yep, frozen. Nope. Is it running again? Oh, yes. Speaking about Carney as a gun grabber, there will be a larger RCMP force patrolling on Ontario. There's actually larger plea downtown Ottawa to have an even larger presence. So you are right. I've been tracking that as well. Aurorian, but you're on it too. You must be Canadian and also like checking out this shit show. Or sorry, tracking this shit show. Of course, it's not. It's taking forever to download for some reason. Yeah, the Liberals too. And there's been so much propaganda regarding that as well. Like even that friggin' movie, because I was watching it again because Gene Hackman just unfortunately passed away recently, but he had a really good movie, and there was a few other great actors in it as well. But it was regarding going to court against the firearms industry and stuff like that, really painting them in such a bad light, of course. And so again, it was all propaganda, and just to get people to willfully give up their right to own firearms. And also, it's always in the best interest of societies for the citizens, because America has the oh my god. Anyways, the Second Amendment, my brain, sorry. I'm exhausted. And so the right to bear arms. And in case your government becomes a dictatorship or they turn against you, the society should always, in order to have that checks and balance piece, have more firearms than government. And I wish people would understand that. It means it actually causes less crime. There's less crime, not more. And this has been proven all over the world during various different times. And the more gun control and restrictions, et cetera, there is, unfortunately, the more illegal crime it's just still happening. And it's actually it increases. And and then there's just so many other issues with that as well. But it's in our best interest for legal, law-abiding citizens to own firearms and absolutely crack down on the illegal firearms that's being distributed across the border and from sea ports and all that other stuff. So let's see here this list. I just want to zoom in. All right. So Bilderberg meeting, honorary chairman Etienne Davignon, vice chairman, member of professor of political science, Birzeit University. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing these. Former Minister of Justice, Member of Parliament, PS got Jacques Algren, Fouad Ajami, Director of Middle East Studies Program, Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, friggin' propaganda at Johns Hopkins University in Cambridge, Fouad Ajami, George Alagoskoufis, Economic Secretary of the Treasurer, Edward Balls, Francisco Pinto, Michael Bernier, Former Prime Minister Carl Bildt, member of the Executive Board, Boyner Holding, Center for Energy, Marine Transportation and Public Policy, School of International and Public Affairs, Columbia University, Albert Brezand, VP, Oscar Bronner, John Brown, Hubert Berta, Henry de Castries, Juan Louis Cibrian. It's weird. GPPF. Patrick Thomas, former head of Department of Safeguards Visiting Scholars, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Victor Halsebrad. I'm looking through this list with you. Henry Kissinger, doesn't surprise me. Henry Kravis, Neely Crows, Maurice Lippens, Ronald Lloyd, William Moody, Jessica Matthews, Frank McKenna, Mark Medish, Montbrial, Thierry de Montemario, or maybe that's Thierry de Montbrial, and then Mario Monti, different people. Queen of Netherlands. Interesting. Gordon Nixon. Norman Pearlstein. Governor of New York State, George Pataki. Huh, interesting. Minister of Finance, Tommaso Schioppedo, or whatever. Richard Pearl. Dennis Ross. Johnson School of Public Affairs, University of Texas. Okay. All right. On with the video.
Needed, and if I would have something to contribute, I'd be more than happy to do it.
Now, the talk was put on by UW's Federation of Students and a Canadian youth group.
This is one of the most disgraceful pieces of journalism I've probably ever seen. Nicole Lampa refused to talk to me on camera, and later after watching the program she put together, I asked her why she didn't at least give the name of my youth group who arranged the whole event in the first place. She told me she was under the impression that my youth group's name was A Canadian Youth Group, and then quickly hung up the phone. In fact, the most coverage that my cause had received from the whole event was published in the local Waterloo paper called The Record, where it was written that, and of course there was that one passionately idealistic student who grilled Martin relentlessly until the microphone practically had to be wrestled from his hands. By the way, I'm not a student at the University of Waterloo. I can't afford it. But again, poor journalism. So here we have the guy who writes the laws, and one of the guys who abuses the laws, which is bankrupting the entire country, getting together in his $66 million private resort, in secret, along with other bankers who admit major crises are used to form a one-world government, ruled by bankers and elitists. You see, Paul Martin doesn't care if he helps bankrupt the people of Canada, because he's already made his millions from the guy who practically made him Prime Minister. But instead of exposing this, these two news agencies did the opposite and made Paul Martin look more like a saint. This is the opposite of information. Misinformation. So now do you see why the owners of the media attend these secret meetings as well? They don't want to expose the truth, because if they did, they would expose themselves. Take this copy of Reader's Digest. The Canadians You Trust. Let's check out who made the list. Stephen Harper, number 8. Michael J. Fox is number 5. Wayne Gretzky, number 12. Queen of England is number 2. She's not even Canadian. But I guess simple facts don't matter when you're a major publishing company. Number 1 was David Suzuki, Mr. If you can't beat Walmart, join them. Bob Ray is number 29. Shania Twain, 30. Don Cherry is number 14. What's going on here? How was this list even put together? If you read the fine print, it states, to conduct our trust poll, we commissioned an independent research firm, Harris Decima, to survey a representative sample of nearly 1,200 English-speaking Canadian adults. Respondents were presented with a list containing the names and photographs of...
All right, we're going to get into more Bilderberg stuff. I didn't realize I was actually being recorded. But I want to share again because there's just... I want to clarify. He might not have went to Bilderberg in 2006. It doesn't matter because he's gone multiple times, including as early as 2011 on the record, which got 14 years ago. And so I just wanted to share that from ChatGPT and then get on Google and share like more people that were on the list. And again, it's Google, so take it with a grain of salt as well. There's way more than this, but I wanted to go to Canada. All right. So royalty that's gone. Bilderberg participants. King Philip of Belgium. King Charles III. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. Prince Bernard of the Netherlands. King Willem Alexander of the Netherlands. King Harold. Crown Prince of Norway. Hakon? I don't know. Carlos Juan. Queen Sophia of Spain. Werner Feynman. Heinz Fischer, Alfred Gusenbauer, Andreas Schneider, Chairman Social Democratic Group, of course. Belgium. Canada, you've got Gordon Campbell, who's Premier of British Columbia. Mike Harris, Premier of Ontario. Jason Kenney, oh my God, what a friggin' seller. He became the Premier of Saskatchewan, I want to say. Alberta? Oh no, it was Alberta. Oh my goodness, sorry. So former Canadian politician who served as the 18th Premier of Alberta from 2019 until 2022. Brutal. All through COVID. Or almost, and the leader of the United Conservative Party from 2017 until 2022. He also served as a member of the Legislative Assembly. Any more than that, but anyway, he didn't do a good job at all. Lord Bernard Lord, Premier of New Brunswick. Frank McKenna, Premier of New Brunswick. Bill Morneau, who was the finance minister, yes, it says it right here, from 2015 to 2020, had to resign. Ethics violations, all that stuff. Alison Redford, Premier of Alberta. So it's left and right. There's conservative and liberal people that have attended these. Brad Wall, Nigel S. Wright. Prime Ministers, Lester B. Pearson, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, surprise, surprise, no surprises, Jacques Chrétien, Paul Martin, Stephen Harper. China, Fu Ying, I'm sure there's been more. Czech Republic. You've got some more. Denmark. You've got Estonia, European Union. Fritz Bolkenstein, Joseph Borrell, Benoit Cœuré, Selina Georgieva. You've got all these like former EU trade commissioners, vice president, European Commission, European Central Bank. Yeah, so many different people in the European Union. Finland. France. Emmanuel Macron, I've already talked about him. He's, most part of WEF. Bilderberg WEF. Same people attending. Germany, got a lot from Germany. Angela Merkel. Greece, George Elagassoulis, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Member of Parliament. Iceland, quite a few. Ireland. Attorney General of Ireland. Great. No wonder they're going through all the shit they're going through right now. Two-tiered justice system. Yeah. And former Attorney General of Ireland. Director General of the WTO, World Trade Organization. Italy. Yeah, President of the European Central Bank. Former Prime Minister Enrico Letta. Oh my goodness. Poland. Founder and Secretary of the Bilderberg Group, deceased. Prime Minister Hannah Schukaga. A lot from Portugal. Look at that. Spain, Sweden, Minister of Finance, Prime Minister, Magdalena Andorsa. See, like, does this like not surprise you? Just, you know, that's why I was saying with Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney, these people have gone to these Bilderberg groups for years. Chrystia Freeland, obviously not as long as Mark Carney. The UK, there's a lot there. Harvard University professor. Chancellor. Cool. Yeah. Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Edward Heath, Alec Douglas Home, Margaret Thatcher, David Cameron, the U.S., Stacey Abrams. Yeah. Got a lot here. George W. Ball, Cindy Berger, National Security Advisor, deceased, rest in peace. Hillary Clinton, Jared Cohen, Brian Deese, Thomas E. Donnellan, Executive Vice President for Law and Policy at Fannie Mae, National Security Advisor, Treasury Secretary, former Congressman and House Majority Leader, Henry Kissinger, a million times, Jared Kushner, Condoleezza Rice, George Shultz, Jake Sullivan, Senators, Dashel, South Dakota, John Edwards, Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham doesn't surprise me at all. Chuck Hagel, John Kerry, obviously. Governors Bill Clinton, Mitch Daniels, yeah, Mark Sanford, Mark Moore, military, Chris Hadfield, of course he went. He's a liar. Colonel and astronaut, selling out Canada. We've never gone to the moon. We never will be able to. It's some kind of a plasma object, whatever you want to call it, light luminary. Former Secretary General of NATO, Colin Gubbins. Michael Mullen. And there's more. Canada, President of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, CIBC, Neil McKinnon, Louis Razminski, Frank McKenna. I wonder if he's Catherine McKenna's like any relation. Canadian notary, businessman, and administrator. He became president of Trust Générale de Canada. Mark Carney, 2011, 2012, and on. And again in 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Governor of the Bank of England from, and then 8th Governor of the Bank of Canada. Chairman of the Financial Stability Board. An institution of the G20 based in Basel, Switzerland. Yeah. Germany. Chairman of the Board of Governors of the United States Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke. Federal Reserve. Interesting. Goldman Sachs, John Waldron. Corporations. Yeah, I got books and music. CEO Artemis, of course, from France. Oh my goodness, again. Nokia Corporation, Royal Dutch Shell. CEO of Airbus. French Investment Bank. Merger. There's a lot. Like this goes on and on with all these different friggin' corporations working with them. Heineken. Oh, that one. CEO of Grammy. Yeah. 1943. Talk Group. What the hell is that? Telecommunications. DeepMind. Artificial Intelligence Research Laboratory, British American, which serves as a subsidiary of Alphabet Inc. Founded in the UK in 2010, it was acquired by Google in 2014 and merged with Google's AI, Google Brain division. Interesting. Barclays, GlaxoSmithKline. Anthropic, Amazon. Yeah, Jeff Bezos obviously has been on that list. Albert Bourla, criminal. Vet. Honeywell. Microsoft, Bill Gates is on the list, obviously. Heinz, Donald Graham. Bill Gates. I already said that. Reid Hoffman. On the list. Greylock Partners. Well, let me put everything up. Alex Karp. Professor in Computer Science and Operations Research, University of Montreal, Yoshua Bengio. 2016-2024. James Orbinski, Professor of Medicine and Political Science, University of Toronto. He was president of the International Council of Médecins Sans Frontières. It's Medicines Without Borders. MSF, aka Doctors Without Borders. There you go. Prize. Hilarious. Just a lot of propaganda. Pushing woke. Anyway. Peter Mansbridge, CBC's chief correspondent and anchor of the National. Not surprising. Conrad Black. Oh my God. Robert Pritchard, the president of Ontario's Metrolinx. From, anyways, just there's so many. There's just so many. All right, back to the show. Cunningham was Harper's minister during a tough recession. Steve has nothing nice to say of him. Oh, yeah, he was the Bank of Canada before the primary and the alternate. And no one had anything nice to say about him at all out of the security teams. And these were people that were high level security, like not just like and this, no offense, but like the mall cops or like it's higher level people that are usually veterans of law enforcement, veterans of like parliamentary protective services or like advanced security detail.